Welcome back to Breaking Silos, People, Power, and Purpose in Dynamic Times. We continue to our next session on transforming organizations' purpose to a cultural movement. Let's hear more on what cultural movements can do for all of us. And I'm going to invite panel chair Arvind Agrawal, founder and CEO, AICL Communications. He's one of the foremost practitioners of corporate reporting, which in today's context is very relevant as it covers ethics, governance, and a lot more. Joining him on this panel are Minari Shah, Director, Public Relations, Amazon India, Kashmira Mewawala, Head Business Development and Chief Ethics Counselor, Tata Capital, and Dimple Kapoor, Group Head, Corporate Communications, Piramal Group. Thank you.
I know, I was about to, you stole my starting line, Dimple. You know, it's so nice to be here on a rainy morning. So good morning, everyone. I read a WhatsApp joke which says, people in Bombay are the only ones that don't go to office when it rains, but they go to Lonavala because it rains. And some of you don't go to Lonavala, but you come to conferences like this. So well done, and thank you so much. Our topic today is to do with purpose, and organizational purpose, and how that can and how it should translate into culture and cultural movements. And like Dimple said, I have a fantastic panel of three amazing ladies to help us demystify this. I will quickly do a short round of introductions. Most of them have, very elaborate and extremely distinguished bios, so I may not be able to read all of it. But to start with Kashmira, Kashmira is the Chief Ethics Counselor at Tata Capital, and she's also the Head of Business Development, and she's got almost 35 years of experience in multiple roles as somebody who's a recognized authority in financial services and financial services regulation in India. Next, we have Minari. Minari Shah is the Director of Public Relations at Amazon India, and she's got almost 20 years of experience in multiple industries and categories. I think before this she was Head of Public Relations and Corporate Communications at Tata Motors, if I'm not mistaken. And Dimple here on my left is, again, somebody with a significant amount of experience, almost 20 years in total, working across organizations that have been startups to global MNCs like Qualcomm, and now diversified Indian conglomerates like the Piramal Group. So I hope that's a reasonable introduction for everybody. And so the other thing I wanted to mention is, and I just read up, that Dimple is also an avid basketball player, if I'm right? And on the topic of basketball, I just found that Michael Jordan once said that the most effective way to forge a winning team is to call on the players' need to connect to something larger than themselves, whether it is an NBA champion or a record-setting sales force. It's essentially a spiritual act. It requires the individuals involved to surrender their self-interest for the greater good so that the whole adds up to more than the sum of its parts. And I think that sets the context for why purpose is very crucial for organizations today. And it is for companies and organizations to determine whether it ends up being some gobbledygook written on the entrance and nice sounding words, or is it something more meaningful, something more real, something that their people and their stakeholders can connect to and commit to. If you look around, many of us from our organizations, I won't embarrass you by asking you to recite or narrate your company's purpose, but I'm assuming that all of us know what it is and are able to relate to it. But purpose statements are defined in multiple ways. Some are very generic and motherhood statements. I'll read out a few. Sony says, we want to be a company that inspires and fulfills your curiosity. Philips says, we want to improve people's lives through meaningful innovation. And one of these days, I want to ask these companies who promise to improve my life Where really have you improved my life? So the question is, do purpose statements end up becoming these meaningless lines of English, or can they be more specific? I mean, let's look at what L'Oreal says, for instance. L'Oreal says, our ambition for the coming years is to win over another 1 billion, which means they're assuming that they already have 1 billion customers, another 1 billion consumers around the world, by creating the cosmetic products that meet the infinite diversity of their beauty needs and desires. That's fairly specific as a purpose statement. Or you could look at Intel, which says that we want to utilize the power of Moore's law to bring smart, connected devices to every person on earth. Can anybody tell me here what Moore's law is? Yes, please. Yes, the number of transistors in any integrated circuit doubles every 2 years. This law was founded by a gentleman called Gordon Moore, who was also the founder CEO of Intel. And the Intel purpose is extremely connected to this scientific theory that their management propounded. And that brings me to my panelists, and I will want to start with Minari here to understand whether or not purpose is something that's more real, and what really is the role of purpose in an organization. And before I do that, I'd like to read out Amazon's purpose statement to you. And Amazon says that we want to be the world's, not the world's, the Earth's. Their idea of world is slightly bigger than just the ground. So they say the Earth's most customer-centric company, where customers can find and discover anything they might want to buy online, and endeavors to offer its customers the lowest possible prices, which is a little similar to Walmart, because they say we want people to save money every day and live a better life. But Minari, 2 questions. First, is it true that in Amazon, in every meeting, you leave 1 chair empty for the customer and ask people to believe that the customer is always in the room?
Okay. So I think that's a bit apocryphal, and I have no idea if in Jeff's meetings that happens or not, but the customer is absolutely in the room. By the way, the statement that you read out, I think what we have, and I remember this from my orientation, is actually to be the Earth's most customer-obsessed company. And that's really it. The part you defined is specific to the consumer or the retail business that we have. But yes, it's incredible just how much of a living, breathing principle this is. Because in meetings, it's a regular feature when new products, or some launches or promotions, anything that's being discussed, to have leaders ask, yes, but what's in it for the customer? But yes, why should the customer? I mean, you will have discussions which go into long things about how is it going to work, and what's, margins and break-evens and all kinds of things. And suddenly you will have some, yes, but what's it in for the customer? So yes, the customer is in every room.
And, the actual question really is about the role of purpose. How does purpose help you do better on a daily basis? And do you, as an individual and as a business leader, see the role of purpose, and what's your view on it?
If I again take Amazon, and I've actually been lucky, I think, to work for some incredible brands. Raki mentioned Tata's earlier, so yes, absolutely. But coming back to Amazon, I think what's great is the purpose here is not something which is on the wall. Actually, I don't know if our walls, some of our walls do have this. But like I said, it's a part of daily conversations. You'd be walking into elevators and you would hear these conversations. So the purpose is this one line, but what we have is what we call our 14 leadership principles. And these are absolutely a part of day-to-day conversations. Like you'll hear everyone go, oh, but work customer backwards. Because we believe that you start with what a customer needs and you work. You'll hear it in every single conversation, or work customer backwards. You'll hear those principles in every, have you earned trust? So these are an absolute part. And is it needed? Yes, I think absolutely. In fact, I think it defines what we do as a company in so many ways. And what's amazing is that it goes to the absolute last foot soldier, in the company.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Kashmira, coming to you, you work for the Tatas, and for long now, the Tatas have been a shining example of what corporate purpose should be, whether or not it is defined. They have, a very humane approach to things, whether it is, the small issue of, the stray dogs in the recently renovated Bombay house, or it is the absolute dedication to guests and putting guests front and center that, let's say, the Taj hotels demonstrate. I think across these two extreme examples, one can see the importance of purpose and values at the Tata Group. But like Minari said, it's not something that's on the wall. So how do you, as somebody who's a champion of ethics within the organization, see the role of purpose, and how does it act as a binding agent?
Thank you for that, and thank you, Ruma and Usha, for putting this together. It's an honor to be here. I just want to correct something when you said I work for the Tata Group. I've only worked for the Tata Group.
Okay.
So Rakhi's stolen a bit of the thunder, but I will add to it. And I have another ex-Tata colleague on the dais. So there is Unmesh also, a lot of Tata-ness in the room. So I'm privileged to be here. So the only stories which I'll ever share are from the Tata Group. So it's not that I'm biased, but that's the only experience I have. So, when I joined the group, which is about 35 years ago, we didn't have terms like purpose, values. It just happened. And later on, you realized, oh, that's what we call culture today. That's what we call purpose today. So things just happened. And yes, I have seen the group being very, very... And I probably just fell in line so beautifully because, what you're taught in school, what I was taught at home with my parents, was just the very same value system, if I can see, which I saw in the group. So was it humane? Yes, I think it was. And this is only in retrospect. When you're living it, you don't realize it. You just love what you do. Yeah. So did we have a purpose? Yes, at all points of time. And the tagline would at any point of time be something like, to improve the quality of life of the communities we serve. We add a bit sometimes, we remove a bit sometimes, but the essence remains the same. Where does it start from? It started from our founder, and I think somebody referred to him in the earlier panels also, Mr. Jamshedji Tata, who truly believed that the community is not just another stakeholder in business, but is in fact the very purpose of its existence. This was a slogan he probably put forth, or one of the comments he made about maybe 15 decades ago. This then actually got institutionalized. So why is the Tatas known for what they are known for today? One is the culture, second is the stories. From generation to generation, we've seen them live this out. But it was also an institutionalized process, where his sons took the philosophy of their father, who was the founder of the Tata Group, and created the Tata Trusts. Rakhi very beautifully brought out that the trusts today own 66% of Tata Sons, which is the holding company of the group. So you had the thought process, you had a philosophy, which got institutionalized to something that the Tatas are known for today. 66% of the revenues of Tata Sons flow to the trust. And the trust today looks after societies, communities, the world over. So do we work for a purpose? I think very effortlessly, but we do. Do we have it on our walls? Yes, sometimes we do. Do we have it on our website? Yes, we do. Do we follow it? I think we do. We do it in spirit. There are aberrations, but that's not the rule. Yeah.
Lovely. I think that's a very good platform to bring Dimple into the conversation. And Dimple, you've worked with various types of organizations, whether they are startups or multinationals, or homegrown conglomerates like the Piramal Group. From your experience, can you tell us if purpose is really all that different across various types of organizations? And as an individual, how easy or difficult is it for you to jump in and out of purpose statements in your career?
Yeah, I love that question, jump in and out of purpose statements, right? And I'll get to that question in a bit, but let me actually talk to you about where the purpose, and can you hear me? I can't hear myself, okay. I think purpose is unique. It's unique to each business philosophy, but also organizations, right? And rightly so. You can't have a common purpose across the board. You might have a common humane purpose to save the planet, and I to that, But having said that, I think organizations need, very exclusive purpose that people can align to, work towards, and that sort of becomes a soul to the organization. How easy has it been to jump in and out of purpose statements? That's the other thing I believe in, is that at the core, we're all the same, right? Our behavior is very individualistic, which brings me to the fact that behavior can be modified, aligned, restructured, transformed in many ways. But it's also a truism that most people will gravitate towards an organization not just because of its business philosophy, but also because of its purpose and its culture. So it's like, you attract the same kind of people. And like I said, it's not just the people that are aligned, but people that join you sometimes will align to your business purpose. And that's the beauty of it all, right? Is when you make your purpose bigger than just the people that are within it, it's more nebulous, it grows, it's dynamic, and many times purpose changes and evolves. At the core, it might remain the same. So for example, let me give you a quick example. Piramal had a purpose of knowledge, action, care, right? And it brought us this far, but about 2 years back, we realized that to get to the next level, you need a little more action, and we brought in a fourth value, which is impact, right? How do you create impact in addition to the knowledge, action, care? So sometimes purpose and values evolve, but yeah.
Lovely. So thanks, Dimple. And Kashmira, taking off from that, what is the role of culture? I've always been very intrigued when I hear, purpose, values, mission, ambition, and so on and so forth. And there is this alphabet soup of multiple things that happen. But I think what it eventually will boil down to is culture, because it's an unhygienic hospital, no matter what its purpose statement is not going to inspire confidence. The fastest and the cheapest and the most efficient airline in the world, in the country, does suffer a huge brand damage when one of its employees, and they have far fewer employees than you do, is seen on video thrashing a passenger. What defines culture? Does culture draw from purpose, or does the purpose get defined by the culture of the organization? I really would like you to throw some light on this.
So I'm glad I'm not the only one who gets confused. But it's taken me a few decades to realize the difference. It comes with age. But I do believe that purpose is really the why. Why do I exist? Why am I here? And then you move on to, okay, if the why is clear, then the how becomes relatively easy. So if I'm very sure that as an organization, as an institution, as an individual, this is why I want to exist, or this is why I want to do business, then it becomes easy to say, how do I land up doing this business? And that's something which will percolate across stakeholders, across processes, across multiple businesses that you may have. That is what then begins to define how are your internal processes identified, how are your processes designed, how you do things, this whole collection of this is the way things are done here, over a period of time becomes culture.
But is culture codified? Is it something that flows top down, or is it bottom up? And you're a salt to software organization.
Yeah.
Is it practical to even aspire to have one binding culture? And if it does happen, then does that become too generic?
So to answer that, we do have one binding culture. And I think what's really helped us is the 150 years, the longevity which we have really enjoyed. And I can talk for myself, and I'm sure that other people in the room would allude to that. We've seen leader after leader, generation after generation, really live by that culture. So at least I have seen that very, very clearly. So whether I was handling a customer complaint, or I was handling an investor requirement, or I was handling a dividend to be paid out, and what is the amount we should pay our shareholder, anything you talk about, how I'm dealing with a vendor, I think it's very clear. So like I said, we are a large group, 700,000 employees present in 150 countries. We will have aberrations. It's how we deal with the aberrations really which define us.
Fantastic. And
Sorry, I
sorry,
want to add
yes,
something.
yeah.
I think that was really well said, Kashmira, because one of the things I think that really defines a culture is the intangibles. Because a lot of times, if a company's purpose and culture are not in concern because people are doing things differently, one of the things, for example, that Jeff says is, trust is about, you earn trust when you do things when no one's watching. When you're under scrutiny, everyone perhaps does the right things. But when no one's watching, you still do the right things. And I'd heard this line. And then I think it was last Prime Day, when, not Prime Day, sorry, I think one of our, another of the, possibly the Diwali events or something. We have something which is called a Prime Early Access,
Right.
where Prime members get the preview to some of the deals and so on. And the whole sale opens up the next day. And there was one particular, I think, phone or something that was being sold at a certain price. The next day, when the actual sale opened up, because of certain competitive things in the market, it actually, because we have a automated thing that we'll give the lowest price. So we automatically lowered the price per instrument by some 650 rupees or something like that. So we had literally hundreds of thousands of people who had bought that phone the previous day, and then the next day it opened up to a 650 rupees lower price. And Prime members to us get more than any, and these were hundreds of thousands of customers. Most of them would not have known that something like this had happened. We just returned the 650 rupees to hundreds and thousands of customers because we said that our customers are promises you'll get the best, and we'll stick to it.
Lovely. But, okay, that's a fantastic example. But is that more policy than culture? And here I'd like to sort of, talk about another quote that I've read of Jeff. Let me just find it. And I want to bring you into understanding what really defines culture. It says, our passion for pioneering will drive us to explore narrow passages. And unavoidably, many will turn out to be blind alleys. But with a bit of good fortune, there will also be a few that open up into broad avenues. And this ties in with the defined Amazon culture of saying that success is measured against the possible, not the probable. And what I want you to tell us is that, is this really all that unique, or is this just good English?
No, it's not, because I think the amount of things that the company does and is willing to fail at is incredible.
Lovely.
And the fact that you're not, penalized for failing. Like a lot of times,
That's culture.
we get questioned that, did you try something new? And you get recognized for trying. And again, there is a process to that. So that's, I think, the other part of culture. That, yes, you must have data, but you must have gut instinct, and you must follow all of that. But going back to the previous example, about was it policy? So because on a day-to-day basis, there are these things which come up. And it's really hard to define and codify every single of these. So there was like literally a quick call of 10 minutes, which did not have any of the senior most leaders in it. And their empowerment was, we are deciding this. So I think that's what I think is the culture, because it was at the junior most level.
I think that what Minari just said is a very good example of how policy is something that probably is a more straitjacketed term, but culture allows you to have a lot more flexibility and probably respond to situations in a far more agile manner. Coming to Dimple, Dimple, you've worked across a number of different management styles. And what I'd like you to tell us is that, is there something called an Indian company culture? Is there something which is a family-owned company culture vis-a-vis a professionally-owned company culture? Because you've worked across the spectrum. And tell us a little more about whether the different ownership patterns have a direct bearing on the culture and the nature of the organization itself.
Sure. So, I actually wanted to share something to the Tata girls here. I'm also a Tata girl, grew up in Jamshedpur.
I'm also a Tata guy because I work with a lot of Tata companies. So this is little agency client Tata meeting, guys,
Okay,
Yeah.
this is like, we're all brand ambassadors for Tata. But here's the thing, right? I've seen it at Tata's, I've seen it at Piramal. And many of us work for individuals, organizations that are started by individuals and family-run organizations. I think it's an extension of the family values in many ways, and that's a good thing because you can see it demonstrated day in and day out if the person's around, and of course that carries through. So when you see the embodiment of values, culture, it's nice to actually emulate that straight off. So I remember as a kid, I used to see JRD. He was extremely humble and willing to, go beyond expectations to do small things that, all of us, for example, have stories, right? And that defined culture at Tata's. We all grew up with the Tata culture. Similarly at Piramal, so our purpose is doing well and doing good. And not too many people know about the good that we do. We have 5,000 plus employees in our foundation that has extensive initiatives in education, healthcare and nutrition, as well as clean drinking water, right?
Even I think the water ATMs
That's
and
correct.
the Swachh Bharat
That's correct. And we
specific interventions that the Piramal Group
That's
did.
right. And I think the chairman's view here is, if you have to take social impact at scale, you have to ride on the government machinery. So very few organizations work with the PPP model. It's very difficult to do that and show results. But consistently, the foundation has actually been able to do that and go in areas and districts that are beyond, even the radar of the government in many cases. So I think the culture, coming back to your question, I think I went off on a divergent. But yeah, I think it's easier to feel and see the culture when the organization has a head and a family that lives and breathes that. But having said that, it's not very difficult if it's nicely, defined in many ways.
And it's anchored in values, perhaps.
Yeah, but I think the point I was trying to make is that culture is defined by people, right? It's not just one individual that says, this is my culture, and all of you follow that. No, we live, breathe, and demonstrate that culture. And therefore, culture is the way you reach and achieve your purpose. So, yeah, I think culture is not unique to people-driven organizations, family-driven organizations, or MNCs and more structured professional organizations. But I think it's easier to see it when you have the family around.
Lovely. So, okay. I think what Dimple said is pretty much turned the whole argument on its head. I think what she said was that, in family-driven organizations, it's easier to see and define a culture rather than in professionally owned firms. But I'd like to, get Kashmira's views on this culture versus compliance. If you see the amount of regulation that companies work under today, you're forbidden from saying and doing many things that would otherwise be possible and acceptable in what we call an informal, transparent, humane, collaborative sort of a culture. Do you see there being a conflict between your role as somebody who's championing compliance vis-a-vis somebody who's also tasked with building a culture?
Okay, so thanks. So you asked me in my individual role as the ethics counselor.
I'm asking you your view.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So I think compliance today is hygiene factor. I don't think you can survive if you're not operating as per the laws of the land. If I look at our code of conduct, it very, very clearly says, here is the code of conduct. As an employee, you are expected to comply with it. It's extremely simple to understand. If the laws are slightly different in other countries that we operate in, you will go by the standard which is higher. So if the law is higher than our code, you'll go by the law. The law, in any case, you have to follow. But if our code mandates a plane which is slightly higher, you will go by that. So I think we all have to understand this word spirit, which came out even in the morning session, that we have to go by spirit. The law is really the letter, and you have to go beyond it. So now I talk as my role as an ethics counselor. If I just had to address a concern going by compliance, I don't think I was needed. I don't think I'm needed even today. You have governance officials, you know there's an agreement, this is how you go by. But if I go back to our values, our culture, our purpose, and I say this is unfair, even if the law permits me to do it, we will relook at what we are doing. And it is this element of culture or the way we do business or the priorities that we give to our different stakeholders at different stages will make you really go back and re-look at your processes. So it's not just important about, I got a concern, I addressed it the way because we are so-and-so, and this is our value system, we've been known for it, and therefore I'll do it. But we'd also go back and see that it doesn't happen again. So I think we have to keep at all points of time ensuring that, yes, I'm compliant, but also I'm being fair, I'm being transparent. Is this really the way to do good business? Because if you're not doing good business today, I don't think you can sustain.
Lovely. Great. Minari, would you come in on how does purpose really lead to becoming a cultural movement, so to speak? Is purpose more important or is culture more important? And secondly, does culture really lead to the breaking of silos?
So, first of all, I don't think it could be one above the other. I think the culture flows from the purpose. Purpose is something which has been articulated and defined. Culture is when you make it a living, breathing thing within the organization, which people can actually tangibly do even without being told what it needs to be. People may express it sometimes in their own ways, but on a day-to-day basis. So I think culture is the day-to-day living of that purpose. And I think the most important, and in fact, I think that whole culture and purpose, I think are the biggest pieces I agree in breaking of the silos. Amazon works across extremely different businesses, from AWS, which is in the cloud and the very B2B kind of a business, to A.in or Amazon.com in the retail, to streaming of data, to all kinds of different businesses. And it's incredible how same is the language we speak. It's extremely easy to move across, like if I go talk to the AWS guys or etc., you'll hear the same language, the same pieces, and that piece doesn't change, which is perhaps why we have the same leadership principles across, the same purpose, all of that remains. And it's actually, again, the same language, day-to-day meetings, day-to-day work.
Wonderful. Are you saying that culture transcends all levels and therefore it leads to the breaking of silos?
If it has to be meaningful and if it's real, yes. I think that's why we sometimes hear, oh, XYZ company has this culture, when we speak negatively about a company's culture. I doubt if those companies' leadership or people, etc., want it to be like that. Which is why culture can be sometimes very different from what is wanted. Culture is the actual real thing.
Lovely. Dimple, you also head corporate communications. What I'd like you to tell us is, what is the role of communication in communicating purpose and culture to the wider organization? And also, what role does infrastructure play in it? Today, we're looking at the Googleization of offices and the building of very different workspaces than what existed even 5, 10, 15 years ago. Can you throw some, and you've recently built a very different corporate office, I believe. So can you throw some light on what is the role of communication and how that leads to a binding, unifying sort of culture, and what is the role of infrastructure?
Sure. So I think, as time has evolved, communications has become more than just PR, more than just internal communications, and more than just external communications. I think the barriers itself is broken on communications as a function. So, for example, about 2 years back, my team comprised only of PR. Now it comprises of PR, digital, social media content, design. We do all of in-house communications, internal communications, external. We work with HR, IT. We work across businesses, across functions. And what is the beauty of it all is that each of the businesses are empowered. Here's the beauty of it all. Each business within, so we're a conglomerate, right? We have businesses, 7 businesses, different verticals, different industries, across geographies, 30 countries. Each of the businesses are empowered to choose their own communications individual, so employee, as well as their agency. However, they choose to work with us. And therefore, what is it? And there's no mandatory reason they need to, right? How are we constantly bringing value to the table? How are you always adding value to the business outcomes? If you don't lose sight of that, it doesn't matter which vertical, which business you're actually supporting. So I think we need to have purpose within the communications function as well. How are you enabling, breaking silos, and building bridges? I think that's truly the core to what communication does, irrespective of function, business, geographies. So, and I think we've all agreed that communication or communicating is really the core to any business or function to even thrive, right? And very often we work in silos and say, no, 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 this is an HR thing and this is just a PR thing. Please don't mess with our boundaries. Stay within your boundaries. However, I think the successful organizations that I have known and worked for have been able to sort of recognize those barriers and then work towards breaking those barriers. I think it's an ongoing journey. It isn't something that any organization has arrived at, but truly that's the core overall.
But does a high quality communications practice enable a better appreciation of culture?
I think, like I said, culture is not defined purely by communications, right?
No,
culture
I'm
exists.
saying the culture is what it is, but does communication amplify and accentuate the culture, or irrespective of whether there's good communication or not, the culture always comes out tops?
I think communication enables culture. Right. We're enablers, and we cannot define culture, because culture is defined by living, breathing people and individuals. We certainly enable it in many ways, and very proud to do that. We take pride in those little successes and victories, because I think enabling culture is perhaps even bigger than the purpose of the business, because if people are motivated and want to perform at their best, and there's collaboration, the business will it might evolve, it might go through ups and downs. However, the people will define whether you succeed in the long run or not.
And your view on the infrastructure bit?
So infrastructure, that I think, in many ways, people are going beyond traditional infrastructure modes of communication, right? We've realized that people are more accessible on their mobiles, right? So everything that we do is mobile enabled. Websites, whether it's communication to within teams, even the media will send you a message on WhatsApp. It's irritating, but that's the world as we know it, right? So how are we actually investing in infrastructure that supports a digital transformation? Even at communications, our businesses, our traditional businesses like manufacturing, they've digitized their processes to bring in efficiencies and better outcomes. So communications is no exclusion to that norm.
Right.
I want to
Yes,
actually
please.
intervene, because the piece about communications and culture. Yes, I think communications, as Dimple rightly said, does enable. But I very strongly feel, because there are organizations where sometimes leaders come and ask, oh, what's communications doing? I think leaders are the first starting point for any culture to start, and unless they really take it. I know, for example, literally not in front of an external audience, but amid staff meetings and when we're talking as a leadership team, one of the conversations that happens is Amazon today is 50,000 people in India. We're ramping up really fast. So how do we make sure that all of these people can really understand the Amazon culture? And I think that's where it starts. It starts in the fact, and I'll give you an example. I was like 6-8 months old in the organization, and there was someone in my team who we were looking to promote. And in Amazon, senior promotions are a big deal, like perhaps everywhere else. So there was a lot of process that you go through. So I was having this conversation with Amit, who heads the Amazon in India, that, okay, does she deserve a promotion? How, what? Because his feedback was important. And he was doing a very systematic pros and cons of it. And one of the things he said was, well, XYZ, is she doing this? Is she doing this? Maybe blah, blah, blah. Is she ready, etc. And then he says, but she has a view of her own. One of the leadership principles we have is leaders will have a backbone, that, you'll speak up. So he says, but she has a view of her own. She has a mind of her own. And if she thinks I'm not doing the right thing, she'll just slap me around. And I thought to myself that day, I was like 8 or 10 months in the organization, that a company where the MD of the company is saying a person deserves to be promoted because she'll kind of tell me off if I'm not doing the right thing is really a great place to be.
Lovely. So, we are almost at the end of time, and I'd like, my panelists to tell us one story where they felt, whether it's a personal anecdote or an example from their careers, of where you really saw a validation of a purpose becoming a culture, becoming a movement, and how that inspired you or how that motivated you.
So I'll add a line first on this communication and culture. I just, when we talk about communication at organizations, we really talk about the role of corporate communication because it's so essential, right? I mean, what do you formally communicate to your employees, to your other stakeholders, what goes on your packaging, what goes on your walls, what goes on your website, what you put on Twitter, etc. But I think as employees or as customers or any stakeholders of any organization, the communication is also transactional. It's also corridor conversation, it's coffee table conversation, it's your body language, which is really telling a story. And that is what is building your culture also. So you can put up all these highfalutin posters that you like, saying, this is what I believe in, I want to save the planet, etc. But if your senior vice president who's walking across the corridor is handling a matter in a very different way, sooner or later you're not going to believe it. And today's fast-moving world, it'll be more sooner than later. Because people actually can see through something which is not authentic. So I think this role of corporate communications and branding extremely, extremely essential, but equally essential for people in organizations, starting with leadership, like you mentioned, to play that authentic role. So if you don't believe in your purpose, it will not flow down. So I just wanted to add that point that, the communication goes a little more than just what you officially put out.
Great. And
to
your
share
story?
I've got lots of stories. But what just quickly comes to my mind at my more formative years, really in the group, when I was very young, my waist was slimmer, my skirts were shorter. And I remember I worked for the share registry industry where Unmesh was my very dear colleague. And in those days, which a lot of people in the audience will not realize, there was no NEFT and no RTGS and no ECS. So there were physical dividend warrants which were posted to shareholders. And when we had Tata Steel, we had like 10 lakh shareholders. So you can imagine the dividend gets posted only after there's an AGM. For an AGM, you have to mail out annual reports, which are huge booklets. So there's a whole statutory time frame. So the GPO in Mumbai went on strike, and we had problems mailing the annual report. Now, if you don't mail the annual report, the notice convening the meeting does not reach the shareholders. So obviously, your AGM is null and void. So the GPO being so respectful of the Tata Group, we actually had a meeting with the Postmaster General, and he kind of came to our help and said that if you mobilize X amount of Tata employees and give us Y amount of cars and buy the bags, we'll ensure that the ex-GPO retired people come and help us distribute. So the whole chaos was that, while GPO can do this for Mumbai, what will they do for upcountry? So we were having this debate, and none of us wanted to, look at that elephant in the room, and we were, all of us were walking around it, knowing full well that we'll have trouble with upcountry, but it's not my problem, it's GPO's problem. They are accepting it. And Mr. Darbadi Seth, who used to be the managing director of Tata Chemicals, a doyen of the group, the era of Mr. J.R.D. Tata, he suddenly calls me for a meeting. I feel extremely privileged. There's a whole room of managing directors. Technically, I'm a vendor, even from a Tata Group, and I get called to meet the managing director. So I walk out extremely happy to meet him, and he looks at me and he says, "Why are you here?" And I said, we have this problem, and many of our Tata companies have this trouble. GPO's on strike. He doesn't even look up at me, and he says, So I said, "No, we're just trying to figure out how we are going to post this. So what are you going to do?" And I realized the futility of the conversation I was having with him. And I felt small and stupid. And there was one part of my brain saying, what have I got to do with this? There are MDs in the room. I mean, I'm just from the registry, And suddenly he looks at me, gets up, he puts down his specs, walks closer to where I was, puts his hand on my shoulder and says, "We're the Tata Group. What we do in spirit. It is the right of a shareholder to receive the annual report. Whether he reads it or not is not our problem. And that right we will ensure that we exercise. And I froze. And I realized that was too big a mandate for somebody like me when you've got multiple companies in the room next door. And he looked at me right in the eye and said, you know, for too long, people like me have held the baton. Now the baton passes on to the younger generation. Hold it in your hand, go back into that room and do what is right. And I still get, you know, the hair stands up. And I said, you know, please can I call your company secretary? And he said, if I wanted to call him, I would have called him. But I have called you, and you will go right there and do it, and do what is right. For me, that was, you know, and today when I say that I've seen leaders and successive leaders walk the talk, I've really seen it on display. And when I went back and I put my foot down and said, I don't think what we're doing is right, people just agreed, and I didn't lose my job.
Fantastic. I think, you know, personally speaking, my whole career of the last 18 years has been in annual reports. And to hear a story like that about annual reports is just simply heartening.
So at least you understand that.
Yes, of course I do. And I've got a few goosebumps as well. But Minari, a story from your end, please. Yeah.
Actually, gosh, there are too many stories, and I've been trying to, in the 2 minutes, trying to pay attention to what Kashmira was saying, but at the same time, quickly, kind of, you know, but I think two things which immediately just came to mind. I don't know if these are the best stories I have, but one was, you know, this was literally my second or third day at Amazon. And there was a conversation. I also head the CSR for the company. So there was a conversation about what are we doing as CSR and community and so on. And Amit said, there are two parts to your role. One is, yes, there will be a mandated spend, you'll do what you'll do. But community is not just people with who we do some specific projects. Community is every single person we interact with. Every part of our business actually must do that. So whether we work with small businesses, how are we working with local ecos, every little thing. And that is really what's driving us. You know, how do we make an impact? And I thought that was a really interesting way because he said every part of our business must continue to do good.
Fantastic.
And that I thought was great.
And Dimple, one short story from you as well, please.
Yeah, I'm conscious we're running out of time. So this is going to be really, really short, and I'm going to give a business example, right? And so at Piramal, culture is one of humility, but it's also empowerment and entrepreneurship, right? So remember, I was like pretty new in the system, and there was a press meet that was organized, and beyond the press meet, the media wanted to meet with Mr. Piramal. He's the chairman of the Piramal Group. And he's very accessible. So he's like, yeah, okay, we'll meet. And he, you know, pulls a few of them, and they come and they sit down, and they want to ask him questions on something that is very different from the announcement we were making that day, right? And just before that, I had told him, you know, don't do this because we just want to stay with the announcement we're making today. Let's not dilute it. And he's like, Dimple, don't worry. I've done this often enough. I got it. I'm like, okay. And then, of course, you know, the conversation went from one business to the other. We are a conglomerate, right? And then it went on and on and on and on. And the next day's story, you had, you know, very, very diffused storyline, right? Nothing negative. It just wasn't, you know, the announcement we were looking to put out. Now, that's my job. And I was very, very disappointed and, you know, probably a little irritated. So I went back to him and I'm like, you remember what I told you yesterday is, you know, don't do that. And you just insisted and look at the coverage today. And I was very new in the system, right? Sometimes I should learn to shut up, but I can't. So anyway, he just looked at me and I think he was a little shocked. And he was like, okay. He didn't say anything, and I was like, okay, I said my piece, and I moved out. But since that time, every time we have a press meet, he will call me, and he says, what is it that you want me to focus on today? You know, it takes a lot. He is, you know, family-owned organization, and he is the chairman. He can do what he pleases. But that just says, you know, he noted what went wrong. Well, it didn't go wrong, but, you know, it wasn't ideal. Small story.
Fantastic. No, thank you, because that really is a good example of, you know, we hear the word empowerment very often these days in corporate conversations, and everything just mentioned in the last few stories was all about empowerment, whether it's empowering Kashmira as somebody who's not perhaps directly responsible for that piece of compliance, or it's empowering Dimple to make sure that she does her job, even if it's the chairman who has to toe the line, empowering communities and a wider definition of communities. And I think the culture of collaboration, the culture of transparency, the culture of having fun, enjoying your work, and the culture of really empowering people is what is driving most corporations forward. And as Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm sure many of you have heard that line. I just had to slip it in. So I've sort of done my piece. And now there is perhaps one more session or lunch. But listen, I have been on time, okay? We started 15 minutes late. So we've really wrapped this one on time. Don't give me the evil eye. And thank you very much. Right, okay, yeah. Thank you, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Arvind, and panel members. Maybe we should have got Alexa to thank him instead of me.
Thank you.